Hello, I'm Thomas. I'm going to have a session here about recycling examples, or how we can make sure that you're able to connect to your system and test using different themes. So this will be a session about test automation. So if you were expecting something else, you might not be in the right spot. And the reason for this is that there was a change in schedule. For some reason, I don't really know why. But anyway, so here we go. Recycling examples. And well, you're allowed to start talking about who you are. So I'm doing a couple of different things. I'm a developer, so I deliver software. I love to implement software as well. So my heart is really at test-driven development and behavior-driven development. I do some mentoring sometimes, and I do DevOps if I have to. I don't really like it, but whatever. It needs to get its stuff into production is important to me. I don't know about you, but my definition of done is working software in production. Until then, we're not done, because no one can use it. And it has to be used by real users as well. Otherwise, it's not really worth anything, to be honest. So that's a little bit about me. Privately, I own a trombone. Or actually, I own a couple of trombones, and this is me in the middle of a stage playing with a big band a couple of years ago. A very unique situation. I don't usually be in the middle. I'm not usually in the middle there, but it happens. Okay, so today's topic is all about reuse executable specifications at different themes, and therefore use them to drive an implementation of a testable architecture. And what is a theme? Well, this is an example of a theme. We take two pieces of cloth and we try to make them stick together. That's a theme. This is in place where we probably can connect to our system under test as well. So I want to reuse an example, and I want to use different themes to connect to the system under test. That's my goal. So we have a requirement here. Our system should work properly, no matter where we actually connect to it. So therefore, we should be able to connect to the model. We should be able to connect to user interface, or anything in between. So this is a pyramid, sometimes referred to the testing pyramid. So we should be able to have a system that works if we connect to the model, or if we connect to the user interface, or anywhere in between. Connecting at different themes have different properties. So if we connect through a web application, for example, it's rather slow. It's very common that you use Selenium for doing this, and that's a great tool that shouldn't be used too much, according to one of the author of the WebDriver, James Stewart. However, it creates a lot of confidence. If it works through the web interface, then it probably will work for our users as well. If we have REST API, same thing here. It's rather slow, but it gives confidence. If we can connect to the model, however, it's rather fast, but it doesn't give me any confidence that it will work at the end of the day. Because at the end of the day, the model has to work. But if the delivery mechanisms are broken, it won't work anyway. So everything has to work properly. And therefore, I would like to recycle my executable specifications. And I can't see anyone here, so I shouldn't ask you to raise your hands if you're using executable specifications or not. But if you don't use them, I think you should start. So what do I mean by that? Well, I mean using tools like Cucumber, writing specifications using a language called Gherkin, which can look like this. There's a scenario, and it's a very important scenario. I have to remember to buy cat food. Otherwise, my cats won't have any food, and they will be upset. And that's not okay. So what I would like to do is to make sure that I can implement a to-do list properly, and that it actually works if I use the web interface or if I use a REST API. And in both cases, the model has to work as expected. So these are my stakeholders. You may not see the difference, I do. One of them is Gretchen and the other one is me. And they will be very upset if I fail getting them food. So we saw a scenario, and if you use tools like Cucumber, you write a scenario, then you need to translate that into code. That's done in a translation step, or translation, we should call that. There's a piece of functionality that will translate from Gherkin, what we saw earlier, into Java code, just by mapping lines to methods. Nothing magic. Behind the scenes, there's some regex being executed, and that's about it. These steps will then be used to verify an application. That's what we're looking at. However, if I want to be able to test using different themes, I need to introduce more than one adapter so I can connect to the system on test. So therefore, if I have a scenario, some steps, I want to be able to delegate somehow to something that in turn can delegate to a proper adapter. So there could be one adapter for a web interface, there will be an adapter for the web interface, and another adapter for the REST API. And that adapter will connect to the application. So what is an adapter then? Well, I'm not sure this picture actually helps you. But if anyone recognizes this is a gearbox, an automatic gearbox to a car. And I'm not sure about the brand here. Say that this one is from General Motors, so it would probably fit on a Chevrolet. But for some reason, I want to use it on Chrysler. And an engine from Chrysler doesn't fit. So therefore, someone has created this plate. There's a surrounding plate here with different holes. Some holes fit the gearbox, some will fit the engine. So having an adapter like this allows me to connect two different things that weren't meant to be connected together from the beginning, and then allow me to connect to them. I don't know if this makes sense or not, but that's an adapter. So my problem here is that I need to create different adapters. So therefore, thinking that the delegator should use some kind of factory to create these somehow. The factory will look into the environment somehow and decide which adapter should I create. The delegator will then use this one, and it could be a web adapter using Selenium in this case, that will connect to the application. It could be a REST adapter, so for some reason we're implementing something that we'll call the REST interface, or for that matter, just something that connects directly into the model. The way I will run this later on is by specifying the theme I want to use. So in this particular case, I will run Gradle with the Cucumber plugin that I wrote that will allow me to run Cucumber in parallel. And I will specify that I want to use the theme model. I could also implement something that will use the theme REST. And finally, I could call it and say, hey, connect to the system on test using the web application. I don't really care how you do it, but please do it. So that's the goal here. And there will be some code written in a short while, but the purpose here is, or the starting point that we have is that I have an application, I have a scenario written, I have a few steps, and it works. But I would like to end up with this architecture instead. So how can I do that? It turns out that it's not that complicated, although it seems to be complicated given the questions I see sometimes at different forums. So let's write some code where we actually do this. But before I do this, make sure we have a green bar. That is, it actually works. So this is a feature I have to buy cat food, otherwise the stakeholders will be very upset, and I don't want that. So let me see if I can build this. Yes, I could. So for some reason it works, and you don't know it, but I know it, that in this particular case I'm just connecting to the model. There is no user interface, there is no REST API. Not yet, but there will be in a few seconds, no, a few minutes. But we want to go to this architecture, where we have a delegator that uses an adapter factory, that in turn uses the proper adapter and then call the application under test or system under test. So the way to do this is to start fiddling with the steps. So if you haven't used tools like Cucumber, this is where the magic happens. This is where we translate from scenario, Gherkin, like this, into Java code. So the magic is here. We have an annotation that connects this method. So my goal now is to introduce a delegator and make sure we use a proper adapter, and therefore is able to connect to system and test in a proper way. So I'm going to get rid of this, and this, and this. I'm going to keep this one. And the first thing I will do is create an instance of something that I call a delegator. And the reason for this is that I want to be able to move the decision from how to connect to system on test somewhere else. That's the only purpose I have here. So this means that the first thing I would like to do is have the delegator to actually create, in this particular case, my to-do list. With the name of the owner. There we go. Then I'd like to add something here, and I have a typo here in my preparations. I'll fix that. There we go. The delegator should now make sure that we can add something to the to-do list. In this particular case, remember to buy cat food. And I would like to add a task, because what I should do is a task. There we go. And finally, I'd like to make sure that I can get the current tasks from the delegator. So get tasks for this person. So this allows me to push the decision on how to connect to system on test somewhere else. And somewhere else is in this helper method that I call a delegator. So this is just a matter of pushing around responsibilities. Where should it actually be done? I could obviously do everything in this step implementation, but that would mean that this class would be very large, and then it would be hard to understand, and this could be hard enough, so I'm going to push it somewhere else. Right? The delegator doesn't have to be public, so therefore I'm going to clean this first. There we go. So I need an adapter, so I'm going to create a thing that I call to-do adapter. That is just an adapter. It doesn't exist yet, so let's create it. And let's create it in the package adapters. And I'd like it to be an interface, because I will have multiple implementations of this one. Yes, sure. Okay. I know that I will need to know who the current owner or current user is, so I will create a field for that. How do I know that? I did my homework and I prepared a little bit before. And I'm going to call this one current owner. Like that. Okay. The decision on which adapter to use is something I would like to push away as well. I could do it in the constructor here, but I'd like to push it somewhere to factory. Why? This will keep this delegator a little bit smaller and therefore a little bit easier to understand, hopefully. So I'll create a constructor, and what I'll do in the constructor is I will create an adapter factory, and I will ask the factory for the proper adapter. And with this one, I can just make sure that the adapter I want to use is returned somehow. So the adapter should be set from the factory with the method getAdapter. So I still don't know how we will connect to system_test. The only thing I know is that we will use some way, and this some way will hopefully be a good way. Create method getAdapter. Yes, please. There we go. I'd like to use this adapter, but before I do that, I'll just make sure that the current owner is set. So what I'll do now is I'll create something I called an owner from using this name. I could obviously use a string here, but that would be bad, because then I wouldn't know what everything is. So I prefer to have a domain type for, in this case, an owner of a to-do list. The add task should do what? It gets a task description. Let's call it just description. That's probably good enough. And I'd like to create a task from this description. And I'd like to add it to the to-do list. So I'm going to do something that I call add task on the adapter with, in this particular case, two things. I need to know who the task is for and what the task is. There we go. Doesn't exist, so I'll just create it in the interface to do adapter, like this. The last thing I need to do is to be able to retrieve all the tasks that should be done. And the way to do that is to ask the adapter for, please give me all tasks for a certain person. And we don't have the name of the person yet. So I'll make sure I create an owner first from the argument name, like that. And then I'll just ask the adapter get tasks for this owner. I'm not really interested in the task for anyone else because I'm not going to do them anyway. And it should be a list of tasks. It doesn't exist, so let's create it. So there we go. So this allows me to push the actual interaction with the system and test somewhere else. So we're just pushing stuff away. Right. The adapter factory must be implemented properly, or actually the method in getAdapter in the adapter factory must be implemented properly. At the moment it just throws a new runtime exception. Why? Well, because I patched my environment to always throw a new runtime exception when I implement a new method, because then I can't forget about it. So what do I want to do here? Well, I would like to find the proper theme that I should use for connecting to the system and test. So the first thing I will do is to declare a variable string theme that I initialize to nothing. I will then ask the environment for the value of this, if there is such a thing as an environmental variable called theme. And if it doesn't exist, then I will get null back. So I'll just do a null check here. I would like not to do that, but well, I can't change the standard library. So therefore, I'll just have to cope with it. However, I can assign the value, if it exists, to this variable. So now I know that it has been set properly, and I could check which adapter should I return. So if theme equals a proper theme, and I said earlier I would use model, REST, or web. So in this particular case I'm going to use the model. And if theme is set to that, I would like to return an adapter that will talk to the model. As easy as that. So I'll return a new model adapter. And that's a thingy that will have to implement the interface to do adapter, and then do whatever magic it has to do in order to connect to system and test through the model. So there we go. This one is a little bit upset because if there isn't any theme, then I don't have a return value. So the solution I have for that is just to throw a runtime exception. The point here is that if we're trying to run this using a theme that doesn't exist, it's better to fail than to do something else. So in this particular case, I'll just throw a new runtime exception with the message didn't understand what seam you want to use. So if I'm calling this without the proper seam now, I will get the feedback, hey, behave. Don't give me the wrong things here. Okay. So next thing to fix is the model adapter. That doesn't do anything at all. It will pretty much do the same thing as the steps did some minutes ago. So I need a private variable that is to do list. Like this. No, like this. So this is my model. It's not very complicated at the moment, but it might be later on. And in a constructor here, I'll just make sure I prepare it properly. So the to-do list, new to-do list. That's it. Now we have something that will work in memory. We are able to test our model properly. So that's a good start, I hope. What should we do then? Well, add task. So I guess we should now call on the to-do list, not that one, add task, which takes an owner and a task. That's it. And then we're interested in returning a list of all tasks, so we can check if the task has been added properly or not. So to-do list, get tasks for a specific owner. So what I just did, and we haven't seen that it works yet, but what I just did was that I replaced the upper implementation with the lower. So I have introduced a way of pushing the decision on how to connect to system and test somewhere else. Complexity complexity has a property that it's hard sometimes to get rid of it. So what we can do as developers is to push it around to a better place, a place where it's easier to cope with. We don't necessarily always get rid of the complexity, but we can always hide it somewhere else. You can always add another level of abstraction until you have added one level too many. There's a quote by someone, Wheeler, that I suggest that you look up if you're interested. Never mind, I just pushed it away, and if I run the same thing, what will happen? And I'm going to wait here until someone says something. What will happen? Sorry? Nothing. Why? Yeah. That's what I expect as well. And that was not what I expected when I rehearsed this 2 hours ago. I made a mistake myself. But yes, if I don't tell the system how we should connect to this, then it won't work properly. So I have to do that. And we saw earlier that I should use -d to send in values to the build system, or actually to build to Java. So if I do it like this, I expect it to work. Yes. And the error message I did get was somewhere here in the middle. Didn't understand what theme you want to use because I didn't supply a theme. But then I did that and it worked. So that was good. Now I'm going to do a git stash. Right, because I'm going to change to a branch where we have much more stuff available. If I can do that properly. So now I'm going to check out my master branch, where I have an example that implements not just one adapter, but 3 adapters. Oops. I didn't expect that we shouldn't be able to see the file tree. Okay. So here we go. We have the same feature as previously, but I have prepared a little bit before. So we have the same steps, almost. I had to make sure that we can clean afterwards, so I had to add a method to the delegator clean, because I'm running Selenium here, and Selenium has to be, the browser has to be shut down properly. Except from that, this is the same thing we saw just a few minutes ago. The delegator should be the same as well. The magic here happens in the get adapter, which is a little bit more complicated now. I'm looking for model. So what I did was I extracted getting the theme. I'm also able to vary which database I'm using. So I'm trying to read which database you want to use, which theme do you want to use. You want to use a model? Well, return the model adapter. If you want to use the REST theme, well, return the REST adapter. If you want to use the web theme, you have to specify which browser you want to use, and then return a web adapter using that browser and, in this particular case as well, a database. So I also added that I can vary which database I'm using. So I will test this using the model and an in-memory database. And I will also use this testing the model and SQL database, just to make sure that I'm able to handle both things, both types of databases. And if I use the in-memory database, it will be fast. If I use the SQL database, it will be rather fast, but I will make sure that I have written my SQL statements properly. And otherwise, I will, in this case, okay, maybe I shouldn't have returned a new model adapter here, but I'm a nice person and only log an error message. So let's look at the REST adapter. We already saw the model adapter. The REST adapter, what does it do? Well, it starts the application somehow. So I'm using, in this particular case, I'm using something called Drop Wizard. It's a very nice framework for building REST-based or microservices, or what you want to call it. This is the one of the projects that actually started the trend of executable jars. And then people from other places came and did other things, like Spring Boot and stuff. And I saw someone yesterday that was happy that Spring Boot started in 10 seconds. Okay. This starts in 500 milliseconds, usually. So I start the application, and then I connect to it using, in this particular case, Jersey. So I'm sending it a post message with some JSON. And I can get tasks by asking for a to-do list for that particular user. The web adapter looks like this. Again, I start the application. But in this case, I need to run a browser. So therefore, I have Selenium connecting to localhost in this case. I'm looking for a field. I'm looking for another field. I type in the fields, and I press the submit button. So very much the same thing, but in different themes. So this is the way to connect to the using browser. Getting tasks, well, I'm looking for the tasks by searching on a web page for a certain ID, and then I'll convert them into a list of tasks. So let's see if this works or not. One more thing before I do that. It's very cumbersome to type all these commands at the command line. So I have prepared with a shell script that will do this for me. And this is the shell script I would expect to be executed on Jenkins or whatever. So the first thing I do is, if I can find my cursor, there it is, connecting through the model. And in this case, I have an in-memory database. And I'd like to do the same thing, but with a SQL database. So two different ways of storing stuff. Then I'd like to use the REST API and an in-memory database. And for some reason, which I can't motivate at the moment, I'm doing the same thing with the SQL database. I don't have to do this. I already verified the SQL database here. So getting rid of this one would speed up the execution a little bit, and it wouldn't hurt anyone. Then I want to connect using the web theme, as in the web application. Now I don't want to use a slow database, I use a fast database, and I want to use a headless browser. And then I want to use a Firefox. And finally, I want to use a Chrome. So this is not just a way of allowing me to connect to system and test using different themes. It also allows me to do cross-browser testing fairly easy. It can be done in other ways as well. This is one way. So if I run this, we should see that it works, hopefully. So I just created the SQL database, and there I just started an application. And once more, and now we're running a headless browser. And now we are running a Firefox. And finally, a Chrome, doing the same thing. And it took me 30 seconds. But the thing here is that the fast one, no, I shouldn't do that, took only like a few seconds. So if I just run the this command, it will take 1 second. So it's fast, and I know that the model works. But if I broke the model, I would get feedback immediately. I wouldn't have to wait 30 seconds, which is almost an infinitely long time to wait when we are developing software. So what I just did was implement something that looks like this. We have some way of delegating stuff. The delegator will look or ask a factory, could you give me a proper adapter? And then we have an adapter for web, REST, or model. Another way of looking at this is pretty much the same picture, just turn around a little bit. Scenario steps, delegator, nothing new here. Ask for how to do it, how to connect. And then we have a model adapter. And then we have our application. So this is one way of looking at it. I can have REST, and then I can verify. So this will verify that the model is okay. This will verify that the delivery mechanism REST is okay. The model was already checked, so we don't really have to check that. And this will check that the delivery mechanism web is also working. And I can use a fast in-memory database, or I can use a slower SQL database. Does anyone recognize this architecture style? It has a name. Alistair Cockburn came up with it, probably 20 or maybe 30 years ago. It is sometimes referred to a hexagonal architecture, or, for that matter, ports and adapters. And the word hexagonal because most people write this as an hexagonal. I didn't. Maybe I should do that. But by switching how we connect to this kind of system, we can verify stuff very, very fast. Or we can take a little bit more time and create confidence that it actually works as expected. And we were able to reuse the executable specifications that we saw a little bit earlier. The code I have been using is available on GitHub. So you should be able to download it and fiddle with it if you want to. And this is actually it. We have 8 minutes. Yeah, I should remember you about a few things. In your bag from GeeCON, you got a little note like this. You should have gotten at least. I didn't. And it's a little bit of commercial for a course we are doing in Warsaw in June. So if you're interested in behavior-driven development, and I think more people should be than it seems to be at the moment, then this is a course you would like to attend. We will do not that much about the testing architecture, but much more about how to understand and how to create these examples. It turns out that it's rather complicated to do them well. It's easy to do them bad, but if you do them bad, you don't really have a use for them. So if you're interested, this is something we will do in Warsaw in June. And there is a discount code up there. And if you're interested, well, just sign up. That's a good idea. Do we have any questions? No. Or? I don't know how to do it now. There's one question. Oh, that's a small one. Why don't we create owner of delegating constructor? Good question. And honestly, I'm not really happy with my example because I would have done it differently if I had had the time. But that would have been too much work to change at the moment. So moving around stuff in the adapters, absolutely. Just make sure it works. Make sure you do any refactoring you want to do on Greenbar. So yes, there are opportunities for improvements here, as always. I'm just a human being. Any other question? Nope. Then I'll thank you for your attention and hope that you have a great continued conference. Thank you.